My name is Matthew Todd, and welcome to Inside the Scale Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Pleased today to be joined by Drew Moffitt from Kumospace. Great to have you here.
No, I'm excited to chat with you. Thank you for having me on the show.
No worries. I'm looking forward to hearing more about Kumospace, exactly what that is, what your involvement is and how that came about. But obviously you're pretty experienced in the startup world as well. And I wonder if you can just kick things off by giving people a little bit more background about yourself, about your experience.
Yeah. So I've been in the startup space for 10 plus years. I have helped build now the 7th company. Initially, I had co-founded 2 companies. I had a modest exit. Then I spent 3 years building 4 corporate-backed ventures for CEOs of public companies. And now, most recently, I'm a very early employee at Kumospace. We're now into almost 2.5 years of operating the business. Yeah. And I've raised over $24 million.
Nice. No, some impressive experience and history. And I look forward to kind of digging into more of the details of that. But just to get us started, what is Kumospace?
Yeah, so Kumospace is building software that replicates all the benefits of a physical office in a virtual environment. So that ability to have kind of presence, more seamless, synchronous communication, knowing more about like which team members are maybe in deep work or available to talk to you, really just iterating faster and being able to think about like a problem that might be a blocker. And often you resort to doing like asynchronous communication of sending an email or a Slack message, and there's just a lot of context and it can lead to a lot of delays.
Yeah, so is this something designed to replace those tools, or in part or in whole, or something else to kind of sit on top?
Yeah, so it's definitely a strong replacement for Zoom. We're building a lot more functionality around the chat use cases for that asynchronous communication. So ultimately that could be used in a lot larger degree than maybe a full using Microsoft Teams or Slack. It's replicating that physical activity of saying, hey, Matthew's available right now. Let me just walk over his desk, tap him on the shoulder and like resolve this matter. Whereas often in the remote world, what happens is you send a Slack message and you're like, is that really a green dot that they're available right now? Or are they like maybe walking their dog or like, making lunch, or what are they doing? And then maybe you guys communicate, but it can't be resolved in text-based communication. So then it's, let's go find a time on mutual calendars in a day or 2 or 3. Whereas that could have maybe most of the communication when people use Kumospace, they find that they go from having 30-minute meetings to having 5 to 10-minute meetings, and they tend to resolve things a lot faster.
I see. That makes sense. They're trying to replicate a lot of what you would see in, physical in-person office environments to the virtual world for remote hybrid teams then.
Exactly.
When you joined Kumospace then, where was the business, the company at that time?
It was about 45 days old. So the beta product launched in August of 2020, and I got involved in middle of September. And what they had found was a chat product, a video chat product that works a lot better with groups. And they were trying to figure out what the right market was. This was obviously 2020. The world was kind of locked down. So a lot of the initial use cases centered around more group activities, like all hands meetings, things of that nature early on.
I see. And, given your experience before Kumospace, then what was it that drew you to that product, that company to start with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I have done a number of different businesses on different continents. And the thing that just caught my attention right out of the gate was the founding team seemed really good. You have a software engineer as the co-founder and CEO, and the co-founder and president is a serial entrepreneur and venture capitalist. So it just felt like a really good founding team. And then the secondary piece of it was they just made, lack of a better expression, it was pretty feature light early on. It was just almost like a widget, and people were enjoying using it. And it just felt like there was something interesting there, but we weren't quite sure like what that thing was yet.
I see. So there were kind of some promising product signs, albeit on a pretty small feature set. So just starting to figure out exactly what that, what the product was, what the market might be for something as well.
Yeah, that's correct. And a lot of that journey in the first year was focused on figuring out like what is that market. So there's a lot of users who wanted to, as I said, they used the product in this like virtual events use case. And then that ultimately evolved as people started getting together physically again. That evolved into this use case of remote teams wanting an always-on like virtual environment where they could build that team camaraderie. And that's how we have been building that use case for the last about year now.
I see. And in those early days, was it pretty easy to find customers interested in trying that out? How did you approach that?
Going back to my background, when I was building the corporate-backed ventures, basically the job I would have, I'd get parachuted into some part of the world and be given a very simple mandate, like build me a developer ecosystem around the car. And I went to Detroit to do that. And I hadn't worked in automotive before. But the thing that you take away from that is you develop this skill set of let's just try a lot of things. And then you get a good sense, like a gut sense of what indicators of success look like. Yeah. So I applied that same thought process to Kumospace. And that's really when myself and the founders connected. And initially it was, okay, let's try to market to VCs. VCs, their portfolio codes are probably small. It's a pandemic. They're probably going to largely remain remote companies. They may have been started in a remote environment if they were pretty new in that moment. A lot of cold outreach to them. Turns out VCs are kind of busy and didn't want to distribute our product for us. And various other tactics similarly so. But ultimately, we had this kind of converging forces from a lot of trial and error. And we were able to realize that there was short form video content that was also paired with this growing calming use of the word Zoom fatigue. And you have TikTok on the rise where a lot of those creators didn't quite know how valuable those views could be. And the engagement to those views are really high. So I was able to test and then ultimately build an influencer and scale an influencer activity that just generated millions of impressions on the internet at a very low cost. And that led to people, and we still have like a lot of brand awareness because of that fact. So it was a really large tactic that carried us through a lot of 2021. Subsequently, we've been developing more additional tactics as well.
I see. And for that short form video content, for anyone else out there who may be starting to experiment with that as well, what were some of the things that you found worked in terms of type of content or how you went about structuring that?
Yeah, so my advice on it is when you approach influencer marketing, you're more buying the audience, but the audience resonates with that person, right? So it doesn't feel natural if you just try to interject something. Like you need that creator to be incorporating it in their activities. So one video that did like really well is there was this woman who makes videos. A lot of her video content's about her and her boyfriend. And one of her videos that did really well was they did like a date night. They live in Canada, and they went out to like a lake and had a like little fireside thing. Built a little bonfire. Yeah. Well, she like replicated that video by doing this virtual date in a Kumospace. And that did extremely well because it resonated with her audience. If I'd shown up and said like, hey, why don't you tell people how they can use this for their virtual like corporate happy hour? like her audience wouldn't resonate with that. So you want to always think, you want to give a lot of creative freedom, whereas you may not do that in other kind of ad or awareness tactics.
I see. So very much steered by the creator that you're working with, letting them do something that their audience is used to and they know is going to come across well.
Yeah, you want to have a brief that obviously says, like, mention your brand, highlight the product, use the product. But at the same time, you also want to give them a high degree of creative freedom. And there needs to be a high degree of authenticity coming from that content. Otherwise, their audience will just be like, this doesn't feel right to them. Like, this is clearly like an ad. Like, I'm not interested. I want to go back to watching their like normal funny content or whatever they create.
Yeah, I see, that makes sense. And as you started to then grow that customer base, then what are some of the things that early audience was telling you about the product direction? How are they helping you influence the both the features in the product, but also the kind of the positioning of the product as well?
Since the CEO is a technical person, he really, the company is very much operated as there's a product side of the house and there's kind of like a business side of the house.
Okay.
And the nice thing about Kumospace is we're a very flat organization. So we tend to be quite autonomous, but you need to communicate like what people are engaging with the product, right? What customer success, is seeing the questions and feedback. So we just built a lot of really good feedback from that side, right? People were saying, hey, we want recording function. We want more robust chat, or we want this broadcast feature. And we expanded the product from, as I said, initially it was just like you could have 10 people in a room with spatial audio, walk around and like pour a virtual drink. And I think even the virtual drink was something that had been suggested by a customer who had been doing a lot of virtual events. And he was like, in a physical world, when you want to exit a conversation, you're like, oh, I'm going to go to the bar and get another drink. Yep. It's like, can you replicate that for me virtually? And we're like, oh, this is kind of a cute little widget. And now it's, millions and millions, tens of millions of virtual drinks have been consumed inside of Kumospaces.
Yeah. Interesting. And in terms of engagement with Kumospace, then how, it sounds like a very, very different model, compared to the normal way people engage, as you mentioned before, either asynchronous chat or on Zoom, and the issues you mentioned around Zoom fatigue as well. So when people are using Kumospace, how much time are they spending on platform?
Yeah, so it's kind of two ways the product gets used. In a lot of 2021, when the world was locked down, it was typically larger formal events, all hands, all the way up to large conferences, things of that nature, team building activities. The users who are primarily remote teams that are using Kumospace as an always-on virtual office, their daily active usage is very much akin to Slack, right? It's always on. It's kind of in the background. That doesn't mean that you're sitting there with your camera always on, right? There's statuses. There's just you're a little avatar in a space, and that gives you context and visibility to what your team's working on, what you as a team member are working on. It allows both parties, both the employee and the employer, want greater visibility. It's why people like the physical office. It's not about so much like, are my people working? It's, as a manager, it's like, how can I be helpful to my people? And as a person who is working remotely, a lot of studies show that most remote workers are actually working harder and working more. Yeah. But they're like, am I actually getting equity? Am I actually getting, like, is that being perceived by management? Do I have the opportunity for kind of career development? So that's really the value that a lot of people get, is just that visibility to collaborate quickly and kind of have contextual understanding to like what's going on right now. Like, is this person able to quickly talk through a problem with me? Oh no, they're in another meeting. Great, I'll look for them later.
Yeah. And in terms of that kind of use case, then do you see Kumospace evolving to a point where like those existing collaboration tools are going to be displaced?
I think, that's a in a very nice world, possibly. Yeah. I think there's always the innovator's dilemma. And if you know the book, it's a famous business book. But basically what it says is often companies that become large struggle to innovate again. The most famous case study in there is Kodak. So Kodak invented the digital camera. I believe in the late 70s was the date, but it was sometime long, long before, but the 90s when digital cameras became a thing. But they put it on a shelf because they had a subscription business in the form of selling you film. So they're like, we can't actually put this product in market because we make so much revenue every month by people having to buy another film canister for their film camera. So it's a similar thing. And you see that kind of progression with just a lot of software and tools. So yes, there's definitely a future where Kumospace could potentially make people replace both Slack and Zoom. I think a lot of companies that use us end up replacing their Zoom, using Kumospace as a replacement for their Zoom.
Yeah, I see. And in terms of the size of events and teams, then how big do these virtual environments get?
Yeah, so you build out a virtual floor. You can put like 50 offices in a single floor. So like have 50 team members on a floor. And you can have multiple floors and just like a physical office, there's an elevator between the floors. We find that works pretty well versus just kind of infinitely spreading horizontally. Yeah. If you think about it, like it wouldn't make sense to have an office that was like one floor of a mile, moving around it. So the number is really based on, how big is your team? And we do every one of our demos. So if you come in and you schedule a demo with Kumospace, you'll arrive right in our Kumospace HQ. So people host all their external meetings with vendors, all of our contractors, et cetera. So it depends on the organization, but if it's a smaller organization, then it's typically like the CEO or leadership that is starting to use the product, and then the whole team's there. Large organizations, it's typically individual teams. So like a product team or a marketing team or a lot of customer support teams, because it's helpful to have that collaboration of like, do you know the answer to this customer's question? Great. You have that very quick synchronous communication.
Yeah. And I like what you were saying about the demo experience, being a natural extension of the product as well, right? So it's not like you're getting on a Zoom call to show them the platform. The demo is in the platform as well. I'd be interested to hear how effective you've found that as a way to acquire, new customers and show them the value.
Since Kumospace is such a visual product, right, and we're on a podcast right now, listeners are probably like, oh, what does that look like? It's like, go to the website, kumospace.com, and then you will see a video, and right away, what I'm saying and describing will make like a lot of sense. So for a sales demo, the best way to show the product is, hey, you're arriving in our virtual HQ, and our team is mostly based in North America. So they operate mostly during North American time zone with some team members in Europe. So middle of the day, there's 25, 30 people in our office. And to arrive there as someone saying, hey, I have a 20, 30 person company. I'd like to see, this is what I'm thinking. These are the challenges. These are the pain points I'm looking to solve. Yeah. It's like immediately showing it live in work.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful environment to bring someone in, right? It's not like you're faking it or showing them a particular view of it. You're letting them see what you see in a very authentic way.
Yeah, and within a couple of minutes, it's very clear like what the product is. Whereas often when you're on a sales demo, you may have to be like explained and shown through the product, but it's just kind of like, lack of a better expression, like describing a physical game, right? If you're playing like a card game versus just playing one hand of it. It's always so much easier to learn like a new game by just like, hey, let's just play one round. and we'll figure it out kind of thing, versus like explaining the rules. It's typically hard for people to like visualize that.
Yeah, exactly. No, I can imagine. And you mentioned some of the problems people are coming with that kind of calls them to book that demo in the first place. But what are the different kind of problem areas that you find that companies are having nowadays that cause them to seek out something like Kumospace?
It's typically like three kind of buckets. So the first one is we're struggling with collaboration, and we feel like our team is missing out on its full potential, and that it just takes too long to iterate on things, especially for smaller, early stage companies. That can really just be like a death blow to your business. So that's a pretty strong pain point. Another one is this visibility that I was describing before. It's like, how, as me as a manager running a remote marketing team, how can I be helpful? Right? And right now, obviously, we're doing the podcast, but typically in the morning, it's like, hey, how's your morning going? Anything you need from me? How can I how can I help you? Anything that you're blocked on right now? Like that's the kind of physical interaction, like expressing your availability that happens in a physical office. And from an employee's perspective, they're like, well, I want that access. I want that visibility. There's so much metadata that you see in a physical office and that you can see in Kumospace. For example, like you can see our co-founders talking about something. Like, so like, that's happening. And those type of understanding makes you feel less isolated and like less, lacking on like what is actually happening in the company. So that's that visibility component. And then the third one is more of this culture component, right? Like our team's really productive, but our team doesn't feel like they have any sense of bonding with one another. And especially like for 100% remote company that maybe doesn't engage in like a remote first like organizational policy where they like frequently, maybe every quarter, bring people physically together. There's just like that lack of understanding like my colleague's personality, because this environment is fully editable and it looks like an actual office. You can decorate your office that like matches your personality, and you start getting to build those bonds that are less like tangible, that just organically happen in a physical space.
Yeah, I can certainly see that across all those points. There's definitely some real pains that any kind of remote or hybrid company will be experiencing. And from what you've described, and I want to give it a go myself and see it in action. But from what you've described, I can see how it's a very, very different and what sounds like very engaging and something that's a lot closer to that real world environment. But then you get the advantage of allowing people to work remotely from wherever they are as well. But with a product that is so very different to what is out there at the moment, how do you go about finding those customers and with those pain points? How much education are you having to do about the possibilities that people may not be aware of?
Yeah, so I was describing a lot of our early on marketing efforts of just kind of getting the word out there. There was an alternative to Zoom. And now that we have that tactic as a use to acquire users, a lot of the focus has more recently been around organic search. And when we are category creating right now, right? You could think about Slack, for example, back in 2013, there's a memo that the CEO wrote, and there's a line in there where he goes, no one is searching for group productivity chat. And that's sort of the same thing right now. Virtual office software is a search topic, but it's more about putting yourself in the shoes of that manager, that like culture HR person, that employee who feels isolated. Like, what are the things that they're going to Google and Bing and searching for, and putting out content in that regard. So that's you're very right about like the education component. So we do very well in branded search. We do very well in the virtual office related, virtual workspace related keyword search. But it's also about like how to run an effective meeting, how to do team building activities, how to run a virtual like happy hour, how to effectively manage a remote team, how to do all these things that I've described, and then that starts really opening up your total search TAM.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you were saying about category creation, something I'm a very big proponent of as well. And I think there's always the dilemma that many people have when they attempt it of, we are innovating, we are differentiating, but you've got to have kind of one foot on that side of things, but you've also got to be willing to meet people where they are in order to move them towards where you want to be, haven't you?
Yeah, and that's, we're always learning from our customers. We're always trying to speak to our customers. One of the things that we definitely pride ourselves is trying to give really good customer support. And that we view as a knowledge building activity. So when we were building out when we were discovering that a lot of users were starting to use this as this always on virtual office product in early 2022, end of 2021, as the world became back more towards normal, we were like, let's just let's find a pool of users who want to get maybe a more buggy version of Kumospace, and like, let's let them just get beta access to all this stuff that we're building. And based on feedback we'd already gotten, and just really iterating on that. So you just need to really listen to the customer, especially at the price point that Kumospace is at. It's free for very small teams, and then it's $5 to $10, depending on kind of how you're buying the product, for medium-sized teams. And then there's obvious enterprise solutions with like single sign-on. But that's really you need to build a product-led growth kind of. People are going to use this product. It's not an enterprise sales cycle type product.
Yeah, I can see that. It's definitely something that lends itself to that product-led approach, because, as you say, right from the beginning of that sales process, you're engaging them with the product, letting them experience the products, and then with those kind of small team offerings, they're able to see how it works, and then scale up as they start to see benefit.
Yeah, and it's really cool the things that people tell us. And for example, a recent feedback call with our CEO, that he shared a lot of feedback. One of the coolest things that this person had said is they run a customer service business. So it focuses on providing customer service on behalf of other companies. And this historically is like a super high churn business, and historically is also a less physical business, right? Typically, the company that's providing this service is not in the same geography as the company that is purchasing the service. So it's a high turnover employee business. And what he was saying, as the CEO was saying to our CEO, is that his retention of employees has gone drastically up since they've adopted Kumospace. And that just speaks so well to these like three kind of pain points I was saying around like the management can have visibility and can help employees learn and do a better job of supporting the client's customers. And they're also like building bonds with one another. So you feel like as an employee, you have a better relationship with your colleagues, and you have the equity of like being able to advance or like get better at your skills.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to add to the conversation on the future of work. At the moment, I know of quite a few high-profile business owners that are basically mandating a certain amount of in-office time for all of their employees, on the basis of maintaining company culture. I think they are scared of remote environments where people may view their work purely in terms of the set of skills that they've got. So their work then becomes reduced to a set of tasks that they can do, whether that's marketing, web development, design, whatever it may be. And I think some of them are concerned that, well, if that's just all they're doing is a list of tasks, they could do that list of tasks for me. or they could do it for someone else, and it's just about where they can get the best salary in that case, right? If company culture is removed from it. But it sounds like with what you're talking about, you're able to bring that back to the world of remote working.
Yes, you get those benefits of a physical office. And I think organizations need to pick an organizational strategy. Right now, there's arguably about 6. I think it's going to get compressed. So you've got 4 versions of hybrid. You've got office first hybrid. You've got fixed schedule hybrid. You've got flexible hybrid, and you've got remote first hybrid, often just referred to as remote first. And then the other 2 is like 100% in office, 100% remote. I think increasingly the hybrid's going to kind of, one of those definitions of hybrid is going to win out.
Yeah.
And I think for certain organizations, there is like certain people really love in-person work. Like, so those companies are going to attract that type of person who want to do in person. There's also a lot of companies who want to have a more remote first or fully remote kind of workforce. So, we're not saying that our product's going to be for everyone, but I definitely think there's a big bucket of the category that is going to focus on this remote. And but that doesn't mean that your company culture or visibility or kind of understanding and making people be better at their jobs should be thrown out the door. Like, there's great degrees of freedom that remote work brings about, but it shouldn't come at some high level sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely shouldn't be. And I think you're right. It's not for every type of company. It's not for everyone. But I think so many businesses can get value out of hybrid or fully remote environments. The issues around geography and access to the right kind of talent can go away. And if you then are able to remove a lot of those negatives that can happen with such a distributed workforce through new platform and software like Kumospace, I think that's only got to be a positive value adding thing for many types of companies.
Yeah, I think increasingly a lot of organizations are going to go more of that remote route. I think there's a lot of just force factors that are even just external to business. If you look at the investments that a lot of countries are making, there's organizations that are called like destination marketing organizations, which if you are ever turn on the TV and it's like, hey, come to Spain and come to Greece, right? That's a destination marketing company. It's economic development activity done by those countries. But there are a lot of countries that are heavy tourist destinations. I know Portugal, for example, and in the European Union, they are, and in Central and South America a lot, in the United States, are giving out these digital nomad visas. You basically can come here in perpetuity to our country and work as a remote worker for an external company. So as that freedom kind of continues to be more popular from a visa perspective, I just think there's going to be so much more draw towards people wanting to work in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a real enabler for this type of working becoming a lot, more accessible, more popular. And, I hear about many companies, starting to consider or revise, elements of their employment contracts as well to actually, state that you can work from any country, or if there are restrictions needed because of time zone things and commitments to, client calls or those kind of things. But companies are starting to think about this now and bake in a degree of, flexibility around, rules and constraints that they've got into their contracts as well. So I think it's going to be, really interesting to see how things like that develop.
Yeah, I think there's, I tend to be a quite impatient person, but I think like human nature, especially in the internet connectivity and world of social media, like we instantly want to declare a winner, right? And then it's like a Twitter debate because the winner hasn't yet been declared. The reality is that there is a lot of inertia against having an instant winner declared in the space. Like you were mentioning contracts, right? The employment contracts are going to take a while to evolve in either way. Like we're a hybrid organization. This is what our hybrid employment contracts looks like. We're an in-person. This is what it looks like, what most probably today look like. And we're a more remote first or 100% remote, then it's going to look different. So you need to kind of develop that. You also have a lot of larger companies. They just are pot committed to physical office because, or at least using it in a hybrid setting, because they are not signing like 1-year leases like we do in residential, like to rent your house or your apartment or house. They're signing 5, 10, 15-year leases. So these were signed before kind of the pandemic, and those larger organizations, the combination of legal compliance and real estate really make it that migration shift a lot harder. I think the CEO of Airbnb put it really well when he announced remote first. He was like, several decades earlier, Silicon Valley cut down all the cubicle walls, cut down the office, private offices, and went open concept. And there was just a lot of like, wow, that's a bad idea, or oh my God, I love this, on both sides of that coin. And it wasn't a decision. The outcome of that ended up being more of the open concept, but it wasn't decided immediately. It took over a decade to really start seeing that fundamental shift make its way through most of the corporate like business world.
Yeah, I remember a lot of conversations about that, and have indeed been in side of some organizations that were definitely on the slower side of those to adapt to people's expectations and around their working environments as well. So you're right, especially for those bigger corporations that have been working the way they work for a long time. Change is slow, but then with the startup ecosystem and everything else as well, and internet connectivity being so good, I think it certainly does accelerate a lot of types of change these days as well.
Yeah, I think the original definition of remote work was telecommuting. And it bubbled up in the late 80s, early 90s, when you started having fax machines and the very nascent early versions of the internet with electronic communication that was more real time. That this concept kind of emerged, and it's grown, but it takes time for these kind of things to ultimately decide what the way that the future of work will look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I even quite recently came across someone that actually listed their fax number. I've got no idea whether anyone's tried using that for quite a few years, but I was half tempted to give it a go just to see what happens.
Yeah, see what it returned. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it sends you back a funny meme.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I'm going to have to dig that out. Yeah. So on the subject of kind of that evolving technology, then obviously you've got other companies as well, like, was Facebook, now Meta, pushing their vision and category design for the metaverse and what they want that to look like. And I know certainly I've been seeing a lot more ads recently around kind of the VR type work environments as well, that they seem to be kind of teasing more than actually, putting into practice. But I'd be interested to hear, your thoughts on what they're trying to look at as well.
Yeah. So, some customers refer to us as like the cheap man's metaverse. And that really is a pretty accurate description, right? Just like we're doing this recording right now using a web browser to actually run Kumospace. We have a desktop app. Really near term, we're launching mobile apps, but you can just access it with any web browser. So you don't need a $1,500 Oculus Pro headset. You don't have that like visual draining nature. I think there is a future where the type of things that the Meta is building or trying to build will ultimately be some version of the future. The question for me is like, when is that? And it feels like it's a really cool product to use for, say, playing like a video game. But for work applications, it just feels way too in like heavy. What I mean,
Yeah.
like the physical hardware is heavy on you. The use of the product can be physically draining on you. You need something that's very light, and it doesn't impede productivity at the cost of better collaboration or better communication. I was describing the innovator's dilemma earlier, and I think if you look at a future where there's a world where a Slack and Zooms maybe gets usurped by product like a virtual office software product, which ultimately gets usurped by something that is a true, very lightweight, easy, no drainingness to it, AR or VR type product. But I think there's probably a middle ground, and I think that middle ground is going to be virtual office software.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like 3D TVs, right, but a whole, like 10 times worse almost. Like, oh, it's a cool idea. It's, oh, that looks nice. I'll stick the goggles on, try it for 5 minutes. Oh, wow, that's really cool. And then no one ever went back to it because of those problems that you mentioned, right? You got to, physically do that. It's heavy. It's going to be uncomfortable after a while.
It looks very weird when you don't have the goggles on, because you're seeing right and left. So the colors are like, there's basically weird shadows on everything you're looking at. Yeah, it's impractically to use. That's a great example.
Yeah, it's technically possible, but just because it's technically possible doesn't mean it's going to be an improvement on the experience that people have. And yeah, with Kumospace, like, desktop, other platforms as well, I think it makes a lot of sense that it's something that integrates with the way that people are using technology, yet it is still portable in its own right, compared to, as you say, having to bolt on a very expensive and very heavy headset. It's not going to be accessible, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we're speaking about the digital nomads and digital nomad visas, for example, in South America, Central America. They tend, those tend to be like warmer climates. I can't imagine trying to sit outside for 8 hours with an Oculus headset. Just like the sweat stains on your skin from that would be unpleasant.
Yeah, no one's going to be posting on Instagram saying they're working on the beach with a headset on for 8 hours a day, are they?
Yeah, they would have some weird tans or something like that. But sitting outside with your laptop is like a very normal activity.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. And I think it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that whole virtual office space evolves. And I'll certainly be interested to see how Kumospace evolves, along that journey as well. But, for other founders, other people working in startups and scale-ups listening, and with your experience and before Kumospace and at Kumospace as well, just before we wrap up, I'd love to hear any kind of advice that you would give them around some of the areas that we've talked to, whether that's kind of acquiring customers or around the category definition side of things. But yeah, any other advice you want to leave our kind of audience with?
Yeah, I think a parting piece of advice. It's December when we're recording this right now. So year ahead planning is top of mind for me. I think you balance and goal settings would be the two things, right? So you want to balance what you're trying to do with where the product is, like what the newer product improvements might be. But you also need to set like clear, reachable goals. Something that often I've struggled with, I've gotten a lot better with, is prioritization, right? So it's like, here's 100 ways that we could market our product, but let's prioritize the 3 that we're going to run at this quarter. And there's maybe 1 or 2 ongoing efforts that you're engaged in. And here are whether you're using like a level 10 type management practice or like an OKRs type management practice, and just here's the 3 goals that roll into that. And then if you're the CEO, it's how do Drew's 3 or 4 or 2 OKRs roll into the company-wide 2 to 4 OKRs, and just really kind of flushing that out. really helps, especially as the team goes from 5 or 10 people to 30, 40 people, to really keep that same degree of momentum happening. And the balance here is you don't want to overly plan. You want to have gone through this exercise with the understanding that the exercise is not going to be a perfect predictor of the future and perfectly right.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think something like that to enable you to have that clarity of focus could help a lot of people, because you're right, there's typically 100 different ways that you might think of or see others successfully marketing their product. And I think you've got to bear in mind what is appropriate for the stage that your startup or business is at. And I think, even with that shorter list, you've then got to decide on the ones that you want to commit to for a period of time and not lose focus, because there's likely, multiple subsets of that list that would work if you gave them appropriate focus. And just because someone else is making one strategy work doesn't mean you can't make a different strategy work. But if you try and do both, then you're not going to be able to pull either of them off very well at all.
Exactly. And that's tough. The prioritization thing, getting that skill set really refined takes some time. It just takes doing it a bunch. But then it's very clear to say why I think this is, why this is number one, why that's number two, and why that one is in the we aren't doing this quarter or this year category.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's great advice. So thank you for sharing that, as well as sharing the Kumospace journey and thoughts on, bringing that to market and how you've approached that, as well as sharing the thoughts on the future of work as well. I think many people listening will get a lot out of this conversation, and I encourage them to, try and apply some of the advice that we've talked to today, and also encourage anyone to check out Kumospace as well. We'll leave links in the show notes, obviously, and I'll certainly be giving it a go myself as well. So yeah, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.